Welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. This morning, Judith Browne Dianis has served as a lawyer, professor, and civil rights advocate in the movement for racial justice, hailed as a voting rights expert and pioneer in the movement to dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline. Dianis leads Advancement Project National Office's work in combating structural racism in education, voting, policing, criminal justice, and immigration. The Advancement Project has also released a poll, Generation Z voters of color in Florida, Georgia, Michigan, and Virginia. And here to discuss this poll and taking the pulse of the younger voters is Judith Browne Dianis. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great. Thank you for having me today.
Well, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And first, before we get into the findings of this important survey, Judith, can you tell us the
because we know organizations that work.
Judith, can you tell us the mission of the Advancement Project?
Sure. Advancement Project started in 1999 with the idea that we wanted to support grassroots organizations that work on racial justice issues, to support them in building power to end structural racism. And so we are lawyers, but we're also communicators because we know that we have to shift the narratives in our country and that we want to organize. We want to support organizers because building base is important. We have to have power in this country to get the kind of change that our people need.
Yeah, and the Advancement Project also has what you call a theory of change. Can you explain what that is and what is it centered on?
Sure. So the theory of change is centered on political power. And when I say political power, I don't mean just voting, right? Like we have power 365 days of the year. And so we believe that we can end structural racism and end white supremacy if our people were engaged in holding systems accountable. That means the government accountable, whether it's the local or federal level. And so that's what we aim to do, is that we support grassroots groups in doing that. We bring lawsuits when we have to, but we believe that the people have the power to make the change that we need so our communities can thrive.
And so let's get into this survey, very important survey. Young voters, particularly Generation Z, that generation, are often either overlooked or undervalued. But your survey revealed some rather interesting findings, including the issues that that particular age group cares about. Can you share some of the more eye-opening results from the survey?
Sure. Well, first, we focused on Gen Z voters 18 to 24 for a few reasons. And we've been focusing on them for the last 3 election cycles. Because first of all, we know they're the future, right? We also know that they have a different kind of politics. They're growing up in a different time. This is young people who don't know a time where there wasn't a Black president, right? We also focused on not just Black young voters, but also Latinx and Asian and Indigenous, because we wanted to see if those communities of young people actually think the same way, or at least about the same issues. And what we have found is time and time again that there are some common issues. The top 3 issues for young voters of color that they care about is inflation. Young people are adulting, like worried about paying rent and about their groceries. The second one, and this is again across all of these communities, is racism and discrimination. This is the protest generation. These are young people who may have, especially for Black young people, they may have gone to their first protest when they were very young, after Trayvon Martin was killed. And then they were the people that took to the streets in millions after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were murdered. And so racism is very important to them and fighting back. And then the third issue, which we did this poll after the Supreme Court decision, the third issue is abortion. They understand access. And some, even those who don't believe in abortion themselves, do believe that the government should not be making that decision for you. And so that's really important. The other things that we found that I think are really important is that young people understand that voting is their power. And they are going to take to the polls. The other thing that we found is that they're not really excited about either party, right? They just want their issues handled. And so they're a little bit of an open road for the parties, and people have to be speaking to their issues.
And so that's interesting. So they're really open to, they're not married to a Democrat, they're not married to a Republican, they're open to who might have, or who they might believe have their best interest in mind.
Right. Well, and I'll say this, there's a little bit of a nuance to it. Like, so young people also believe that the Democratic Party is the party that cares more about the issues that they care about. So they, on policing and on debt cancellation, et cetera, they know that the Democrats, they feel like the Democrats will do more for them, but they're not necessarily wedded to one party yet, right? Some of them, this is, 2020 might have been the first time that they were voting. And so they want to know who's going to take care of the issues that I care about the most.
Right. And did the Advancement Project, when doing this survey, get a sense on what that generation think of the voter suppression laws that have popped up all across the country, and what might they be doing to overcome this?
So they are concerned about it. It didn't rank very high up in their issues, but they are concerned because they don't want to have to, go through, jump the hurdles, right? Just like any Black folks, we don't want to jump hurdles, and we shouldn't have to jump hurdles in order to vote. Voting should be accessible and it should be easy. And so young voters know that there are these problems, but it doesn't deter them. That's the other thing about Black voters, right? A lot of times people say, oh, you can't talk about voter suppression. Black people are going to say, oh, forget it. I'm not going to. No, Black people are used to fighting. Right? We're used to having hurdles. And we also know that when people erect these kinds of barriers to voting, that it must be important. Like, voting must be really important. So we're going to fight for that right to vote. But young people also, I think, are concerned about whether or not their ballots will be counted. And so what we found is many young people, especially like young people in Georgia in particular, said they were going to wait until Election Day. And while we want more people to vote early voting so you don't have to wait in line, et cetera, young voters did say they might wait until Election Day, which really is adverse to making it like, we want it to be simple for people. You shouldn't have to wait till Tuesday. But I think there's starting to be a distrust of our electoral system. And that's because that's what Republicans have done. They have made us think that there's all kinds of voter fraud, and there's not. And so I think young people are starting to believe that misinformation.
They're starting to believe that there is voter fraud?
Yes, they are. And that, and that means, what that means for them is that they want to show up on Election Day, see that ballot go into the machine, to make sure that it gets counted.
Yeah, we're talking to Judith Browne Dianis, who leads the Advancement Project national offices working combating structural racism in education, voting, policing, criminal justice, and immigration. And the Advancement Project has commissioned a survey of Generation Z voters of color in Florida, Georgia, Michigan, and in Virginia. Why was it important for the southern states to be involved in this survey?
Well, we looked at states that we know are battleground states, because first of all, what we do is that we've done this polling, and then what we do is we share it out with our grassroots partners who are doing get out the vote efforts, so that they know how to talk to young people and what young people care about. And we also have done some social media ads targeting young voters of color in those states. And we picked those states again because they're battlegrounds, because they're important races. We wanted to make sure that young people know what is at stake in these elections. So that's why, Florida and Georgia, of course, Georgia is, has the gubernatorial election. There's also the senatorial election. And so we know that there's a lot of effort being put to turn out voters there. And then in the same thing in Florida, you have a Senate race and you also have a gubernatorial race. And we also know that that there are large concentrations of young people of color, especially Black people in the South. And we need to make sure that we're talking to them.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that these young voters, the Generation Z to be specific, that they don't know America that didn't have a Black president, right?
Right. Right.
But they also know a political system that has really turned, for lack of a better term, violent. It's become very hostile. And we saw what the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband, the violent hammer attack, which really was meant for Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker.
Right.
Are they concerned about the way democracy has deteriorated? I mean, or is it one of those things that, like you said, with the Black president, they don't know any difference at this point. They don't know America without this hostility.
Right. Well, when I say they don't know anything, they know about a Black president and they know life with like the fact that one existed is really that they know the possibilities, right? Mm-hmm. They know that, like, I grew up in a time where there was never a Black president. So like, right. I didn't think it could happen, right? They know that Black people can actually win, at a national level. And so that opens up opportunities, that opens up their imagination and their desire to participate, because they know that it actually can make a difference. Now, at the same time, we're living in dangerous times, right? Like our democracy is literally on the line, and it's on the line in a way that we haven't seen probably since the Civil War, right? When really like people are ready to take up arms in order to enforce and have this this power grab that maintains power for the white majority right now. And so this generation, though, is not scared of that, right? This generation is the generation that, like I said, took to the streets in 2020 to protest police violence. And that's a brave thing to do, right? When you know that you can be marching down the street and the police could kill you and get away with it. That's a really courageous thing to do, to go toe to toe with the police. So I don't think that they are scared of it, but I think it underscores how important this moment is.
Do they, Generation Z, do you find, and I don't know if this was part of your survey or not, but do you find that there is a voice that they look to, or any individuals or groups that they look to? Everyone looks for a leader, it seems. We always hear black leader, but are they looking at a leader or a group or anyone, or they just really are just banding together themselves and doing it from within?
Well, it's interesting. We actually tested a number of names to see, who they listen to, and they actually, first of all, Black Lives Matter still is very important to them. Like that. I don't know if that's as an organization or as just we actually asked what organization do you trust and would you listen to? And they said Black Lives Matter, and that was like the high, and then it was a fall off from there. It was, we ran Democratic names, including those who are really progressive. We ran Republican names, and didn't do well. So again, this is the generation that protested. This is the generation that is the Black Lives Matter. That's who they are, right? And so I think that's important. I also think that this is a generation that, because I know, over the years as I've been involved in movement work, what we say is that, this generation of leaders, it's a leaderful movement, right? There is not one voice. We don't have a one Martin. We don't have a one Malcolm. There are many young people who are out there. And I think also because social media is so important to this generation, that there are so many voices, so many platforms, so many ways in which they get their news and people that they're listening to.
Wow. And we know, and you kind of touched on a little bit, Roe v. Wade had it remains a massive issue for many, right?
Yeah.
Now, just today, as we speak, the Supreme Court is hearing arguments on the legality of affirmative action at colleges and universities. Again. Yeah, as it pertains to admissions. What's the sense from the younger generation of color on these issues, particularly the affirmative action issue that's before the court now?
Yeah, so we didn't test affirmative action. We did education, and which ranked pretty high with the Latino community in particular, young people, but kind of was low down in the issues. Because I think a lot of young people are thinking about their day-to-day issues, right? Like today, I can't pay my bills today, right? And so like that feels like a lofty kind of like, okay, that thing over there. But I do think, we have these moments like this Supreme Court moment where it comes front and center. And I also think that we probably have not done such a great job really explaining how affirmative action is still important. A lot of people think affirmative action has been dead, like it's like doesn't exist any longer, but it does. And so I think that's the other issue, is that there probably has not been a great way in which it's been explained to young people about how it's still in existence and what is on the line right now. And it's confusing because it's also like Asian folks on the other side, so an Asian group that is on the other side, making it a much more complicated conversation about access to higher education.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier about the economy and inflation. It's almost a little bit of a surprise that the younger ones, that's an issue for them. But is it really motivating them to the polls? As you said, that they're going to wait till election day.
Yeah, I don't think that's a motivator, right? I think it's the other issues. Abortion is a motivator, right? It is like they understand what is on the line, and the fact that young people saw what happened in Kansas, where there was, people voted on it. So like that, they were able to connect their vote to making change because of what happened in places like Kansas. So the economy is not a motivator. It is the thing that's most concerning to them. It is the thing that they worry about. But they don't think that either party has an answer to that issue right now. Whereas they do on their second and third issues on racism and abortion, they do think that the Democrats have a slight advantage.
Wow. And so as you said too, they are not necessarily looking at one party or the other. They're looking at what works, right? But is there a sense that, we hear older Black voters, older Hispanic voters talk about the, how they fear as one party taking over Congress, one party taking over the Senate. Is there more of that awareness of democracy in that sense that, look, if this party has control of the Senate, if this party has control of the House, this might happen to us? Is there more of a sense of that?
There's not. So this was the other thing that we found out about Gen Z voters, is that they really needed information about the candidates and about the system, our democracy as a system, because in fact, when we first started with focus groups before we did the polling, young people didn't actually even know about the midterms, right? And that's partly because we focus so much on presidential elections and turning people out for that. And some of them, like I said, this is their first time voting was in 2020. So they actually didn't even know. They're supposed to vote in 2 years, and I get that. I get that because we spend so much time talking about presidential years. And so you have to overcome that, hurdle first, right, is number one, there's an election. Number two, who's on the ballot, and like, let's make the connections between when you vote in this governor, this is what's going to happen and what is within their control. And a lot of folks are not making that connection. And I think that's part, of what we have to do on our side of being like a movement, a progressive movement, is to make those connections so that people do understand. Like, I've been starting to make these little videos on like Instagram, like, nobody's watching Auntie on Instagram, but just in case you happen by my page, right? Like, I'm like, let's talk about abortion. Now, who makes these decisions? Let's talk about them. I'm doing today about affirmative action. Who's sitting on that court making a decision about whether or not you should be able to go to college, right? And so that is stuff that we have to do. And you think about it, like, it's becoming more and more important, because as states start to get rid of, any discussion about race in our schools, we're gonna have to be doing that, right? We're gonna have to get back to like old school. Teach your own kids, your community. We need Saturday school, all of that, because school systems are not going to be breaking it down. Not that they ever really did. Right. But we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that our community is fully informed.
Well, yeah, and these again, in the survey, these are 18 to 24-year-olds, college age students, right? Mm-hmm. Are they concerned about the muzzling of books about Black history, even Latino history, Asian history? Are they concerned about that so-called critical race theory?
They are, but I also think it came out in because their second most important issue was racism. I think that people put a lot into that one thing, that one category. Because if you talk to me about racism, I'm thinking about police, right? Some people would be education, et cetera. And so I think they are concerned. I think that, again, this comes down to us, like, in the progressive community, being able to break things down in a much more accessible way. Because, that whole conversation about critical race theory, I went to law school, so I fully understand it, because that's actually what critical race theory exists in law school, right? And so most people don't know what that, what it is, and what, and the right has done a job on it, trying to use something that it's not, for the purposes of just erasing our existence, right? Yeah. And so I think we again have to do a better job of being able to break these things down for people and to make the connections. Like, when this person says this during a campaign season, is what they really mean, right? And being able to cut through some of the noise.
Do these young ones, from what you can surmise, do they believe that the so-called old guard, the OGs, listen to them at all?
No, they don't. I mean, no. And this is not from the poll. I mean, it's just from my experience in movement spaces. There has been like a struggle over, like, move out the way, right? Like, we got this, right? In some circles. And I do think, but I will say this also, that I think there has been a coming together of some of the OGs and some of the younger folks. So, for example, some of the folks who are SNCC elders, right, have done an incredible job working with young people, right? Not young people like high school students, but young, like, college age students, explaining to them what they did, what Freedom Summer was like, all of the work that they did in Mississippi and North Carolina, and being connected to young people, knowing that, we've got something to share with you all about what we learned during our time, and young people have listened to them. But I think a lot of that, it just depends on the way in which they're approached, right? And the kinds of conversations, and coming out of love, right? And the desire to, like, make sure that their work is stronger.
Yeah. And how determined are they to be heard, whether at the polls or in general?
Oh, they're determined. I think this is I have a 20-year-old, so I know that. I mean, it's a generation that, this is the thing. It's also because they're living in an age of social media, they can be heard all the time, right?
Right.
They can go to Instagram and like have a whole diatribe about something political. They can go to TikTok. They get all of those platforms that allow for the public square has gotten much larger, right?
Yeah.
And the public square it has a very low entry barrier. So anybody can get up in there, right?
Yeah.
And be able to have something to say, and people are going to listen. Now, that also allows for a lot of disinformation and misinformation, right, to be circulated. And that's the unfortunate part about it. But it does, it means that, we've got young people who are speaking up all the time, and they have followers. They have, millions of followers who are following young people listening to themselves talk. So I think, in many ways it's great because it is giving space for them to develop their own politic.
Yeah. And I mean, you've throughout your career, throughout your adult life, you've kind of had your pulse on the finger of young ones anyway. Judith, you grew up in Hollis, Queens. I understand there's not too many places better to grow up, let me say.
You must be from Queens.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Right.
And when you think about when you grew up, and I mean, I know there's not much of an age difference between you and these Generation Zs, but what do you see that stands out that's a real big difference to when you were growing up and now this generation? What's the big difference?
Interesting. So, I'm thinking like 18 to 20 something. I was in college, and I was in college at a time where some people were protesting what was happening in South Africa and apartheid. And, and where I went to school, we're protesting that and racism on campus. Right. And again, I think that difference is the way in which they can communicate and mobilize much faster, right? I mean, it's because of social media, right? You can put out a flyer or a tweet or something on Instagram saying, meet up at noon and we're going to take over the streets. And it happens like that, right?
And aren't they a bit more creative today than perhaps our generation?
I think that's true. I think and also the use of, and in that creative way, the use of arts and culture in movement space, right? Like, I think that always happened, but I think that people are much more free to do that so that it connects with people, right? Like being able to do murals there's a way in which that becomes part of movement work. And the other thing that I love about this generation is that they infuse Black joy into their work. You're doing movement work, which is hard, but they know how to infuse Black joy. Like, I think about New Georgia Project and the work that they have done in Georgia in getting people out to vote. And they did parties at the polls in 2020. It is a beautiful thing, right? Because it does bring people into a space where they think about their freedom, right? We're not just thinking about the oppression, but we're thinking about our freedom because we're also getting fed by the joy of our culture. And so it is incredible that they do that, and it's exciting. It really is quite exciting.
Well, Judith Browne Dianis, who leads the Advancement Project's national offices work in combating structural racism in education, voting, policing, criminal justice, and immigration. This Advancement Project released a poll, the Generation Z voters of color. Where can folks find this poll?
Can find the poll on our website, which is www.advancementproject.org.
Fantastic. And urge people to go take a look. And it's really important to engage and to see where the young ones are, but also to engage them, right?
That's right. And engage in a way that is respectful, right? And is because they know a lot. That's the
Yes, they
thing.
do.
It's like hard when you're like, these kids don't know nothing, but they do know a lot, right? They have a lot to gain and learn, but they also have a lot to teach us if we just sit back and listen every once in a while. So
There you go. Wisdom personified right there. Thanks so much, Judith
thank
Browne
you.
Dianis, for joining the Black Press's Let It Be Known. Thank you all, and we will see you tomorrow.